Today, I'm going to be ranking the top 10 weapons in Fortnite Save the World. The last time I covered this was 2020, over 3 years ago, and I'm older, I'm wiser, there are new weapons in the game, see that #1 position, by the way, and I just have a lot to say, and yeah, honestly, I'm excited. So, let's get a couple of disclaimers out of the way so that you guys know what this list is and that you're not disappointed with how things go. First and foremost, I like to focus on damage and overall viability, so I'm not just ranking this list based on DPS, I'm considering all the different factors, and I'm also going to be considering some loadouts in the game because there are some weapons on this list that are strictly reliant on the loadout. A big example is the Blackout AR. This thing, as you can see, can do millions of damage very consistently. It's insanely strong. However, that weapon is entirely dependent on that loadout. So would I be ranking the weapon itself or the loadout? So that's what I'm trying to balance in this list. By the way, if you want a video on some of the strongest loadouts in the game, I'll link that down below. Super fun watch, but that's what I'm trying to work with here. And on top of that, some weapons in this game are fundamentally uncomparable. How do I take that Blackout AR and compare it to the Storm King's Ravager? They're completely different weapons, but they're both on the list. So how I am doing this video is sort of grouping weapons because there are a lot of very similar balanced weapons in this game. So this top 10 list is really going to be discussing about 30 different weapons that all sort of are similar in their categories. So you're going to get situations where certain weapons might rank higher than a weapon that might be better than it, but I'm going to be ranking bows in their own category, the best shotguns in their category, some of the lower shotguns in their own category, and I'm going to try and keep everything sort of level in that way. And the final disclaimer I want to make is that this is for entertainment purposes. Like I said, these are highly subjective, however highly informed positions. I have nearly 7,300 hours in this game. I am well informed on the best weapons in the game, but even my own list, the more I look at it, the more I disagree with little aspects of it, and I think it's a solid list. I think we're good to start, so let's start with the number 10 position. The number 10 position is going to some of the better shotguns in the entire game. I should say, in a top 10 list for every weapon in the game, there are no bad weapons that will be mentioned today. So with that said, let's start off with the Maverick. The Maverick is a base game shotgun that's available in regular missions and your llamas very regularly. It has a great area of effect damage. It can go straight through shielders. It has great perks, affliction, any element, super solid pick, and the Big Shot is a very similar weapon. While it doesn't have affliction, which is super strong, it has that Art Deco 6 perk that gives it a 44% damage bonus to any of the different elements. That is a huge amount of extra damage and super deserving of that number 10 position. And then the other two weapons on this list are the Room Sweeper and the Tiger Jaw. I've been talking about these weapons for years as weapons that complement each other very well. The Room Sweeper shoots very fast. It's a drum magazine that reloads in one go, does really good damage per second, but it's a lot of ammo to achieve that same result. And the Tiger Jaw is kind of the opposite. Same good damage, but it's a slower firing, harder hitting weapon that has less ammo in the mag. So if you want to shoot a shotgun that's basically like an assault rifle and do tons of damage with it, the Room Sweeper is an awesome choice. And the Tiger Jaw is a little bit more ammo conservative, a little more focused on a single target. Not to mention, both the Tiger Jaw and the Room Sweeper have the same Affliction 6 perk, which is awesome, same great perk options, and all of the elements, just like the others. Both of them are amazing, both of them are great. If you guys want to use shotguns to their fullest, I'm going to link my best shotguns loadout video in the description down below, so you guys can build it yourself. Now in the number 9 position are, again, some of the best melees in the game, but most of these melees are dependent on a certain loadout. I think all of these melees can stand out on their own if you ever get stuck with them in Ventures, for example, but these weapons can do really well with certain configurations. So the perks on the Stormblade are a little weird, but with Paleoluna in the lead and the right loadout, this build is insane. You can see it on the screen. It's doing tons of damage, great group damage, good single target damage. This thing is clocking over 1.5 million damage per second from a single target solo. So if you're in a group attacking a crowd, you could be doing several million damage per second to the area in front of you with this Stormblade loadout combination. Another amazing option is the Klax. It is a weapon that is honestly overlooked by many players. It looks super goofy. You might have overlooked it, but its affliction is really strong. That's true for most melees, which means you only need to hit an enemy one time, and they're probably going to die if you walk away. Attack speed crit damage, again, is a weird combo, but if you put this with the right build, it actually performs incredibly well. You don't even need this exact perk loadout. Double attack speed, Paleoluna, Blast in the Past, the same usual stuff. Ninja loadout build guide in the description down below. Check it out. It is a very strong melee, and it's a treat to use whether you're using Totally Rockin' Out or Blast in the Past. Another one that surprised me is the Ear Splitter. This weapon's not the hardest hitting melee in the game, but it has a 6 perk where if you eliminate enemies, they'll start to dance. That's not unique to this weapon. It's unique to the Boombox set. Every weapon with that 6 perk is pretty fun to use, but this melee, especially with the right build, again, shown on screen, video link down below as well, this thing just performs great. It's making the enemies dance, so you're fundamentally invincible while they're trying to attack you, but you're also cooking up Rock and Riff, attacking faster, and it's doing well against the single targets. It's a really good combination, and when this weapon can have every element, you can just use it for whatever mission you need, and you're off to a great time. I should also mention that the heavy attack attack is really, really good for support because it can stack up damage to your teammates 4 times for 10% each, giving them an effective 40% damage bonus. It's kind of like a war cry in your pocket. That heavy attack also does damage to the enemies around you, and some people like to use it for farming. That's pretty niche. I don't usually support this as a farming method, but it can work in certain configurations. Mostly it's best for buffing the damage of you and your teammates. And the last thing I want to mention in this category is a Stabs Worth a Third. This weapon is a perfect Paleoluna base game weapon. Double attack speed on top of this weapon being the fastest base swing speed of any melee in the game means you can swing super, super quick, outputting tons of great affliction damage. It could be any element, and with Paleoluna, Blast from the Past, typical as usual, you are going to be outputting millions of damage. It's really, really strong, and it's accessible to everybody. One small note, if you wanted to recreate that, is that mine is Sunbeam, but that's only better for melees if you're doing damage with the weapon itself. If you're just using double attack speed and Paleoluna in general, you do want Bright Core because swinging faster will get you more damage output in that configuration. For the number 8 position, we're going to be talking about some of the best ARs in the game. I am personally in favor of the Ranger for this category. This weapon is a highly accurate 2-round burst weapon, which if you tap, 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 fire, it's basically like a fully auto AR with excellent perks. Every single element and affliction as usual is amazing. This thing has become one of my favorite weapons in the game because I love a very precise playstyle. A lot of people like the Wraith for the same thing. While it doesn't sustain that accuracy, its first few bullets are very, very accurate with a high base crit chance of 20%. You can get up to a 48% crit chance without even using Totally Rockin' Out. It has excellent perk combinations. You can see crit rating double crit damage is optimal for a weapon like this. Reload gets you back in the fight. Again, any element is so huge. Affliction is always amazing. This weapon can do a ton of damage with few bullets, then you can move on to the next target. You can also run triple crit damage on this weapon with Totally Rockin' Out. It's a very fun combination. It's not my favorite. That's why we're putting it in the number 8 position, but I can honestly see why so many people love this weapon. Something else that's amazing is the Floor Flusher. This is another Art Deco weapon with that extra 44% damage. It's a pretty mediocre weapon versus physical targets, although it's still very strong. But if you pair it with the correct 6 perk and the correct element versus an elemental target, you can sit down a power level 250 smasher in one magazine. It's an incredibly strong weapon, one of the highest DPS ARs in the game when everything aligns properly. Very, very fun weapon. I highly recommend 3 copies of these, one for each element, because it is incredibly strong when used correctly. Another great weapon that's an event weapon this time is the Pain Train. This is only available during the holiday section. I have a yearly timeline. I'll link in the description down below if you guys want to see when stuff comes out. And this thing is like a Swiss Army knife of weapons. You do want fire rate, crit damage, crit rating typically. I have my best perks video on this. I'll link it down below because it's a little complicated, but there are some really, really interesting ways to run it, and the 6 perks are a myriad. So Affliction is something I am a huge fan of. I'll explain this now because I've mentioned it like 8 times. Affliction does damage to a target over time. Back in the old video in 2020, Affliction did very little damage. It was nice to have, but very mediocre. Nowadays, that's not true. Affliction does a ton of extra damage nowadays, and it has no damage drop off. So there are very real situations where you can tap a target from far away and just watch him die, which means even at any range, close range especially, if you're using a fully auto weapon like the Pain Train or any SMG or whatever, you can just spray through a crowd of enemies, hitting each enemy one individual time, and Affliction will do your damage while you're moving on to the next target. That is incredibly strong. Even versus a single target like a mini boss or a smasher or a mist monster, if you're laying into that single target, Affliction will just continue to stack damage once per second as you're shooting that target. It's a ton of extra damage. If you use it appropriately, it's basically like extra area of effect damage. Affliction nowadays is, in my opinion, the best normal 6 perk in the game. That's not universally true, but because Affliction is as strong as I said, and it's available on so many base game weapons, I honestly have to share that because Affliction is awesome. Another thing though about the Pain Train is that you have the stacking crit rating and stacking damage. That's common on a lot of weapons nowadays. It's nice to have. You can see in this specific example, I pulled up my double crit damage copy with stacking crit rating. It might not be ideal, but it's a fun way to play. Like I said, the best perks are linked down below. This weapon can go in a lot of different directions. Now, the last 2 in this category are the Razorblade and the Siegebreaker. Both of these are pretty good base game ARs. They are available to any player at any point in the year. The Razorblade is a burst weapon, but you can just hold down the trigger. It's super strong. For all the reasons I've been mentioning, good perks, all the elements, affliction, whatever, it's super strong. Same deal with the Siegebreaker, but it's not a burst, it's a fully auto. It's not the strongest weapon in the game. That's why we're talking about it in the number 8 position, and we're talking about it last. Like I said, I've been ranking this tier list on classes of weapons. I do believe the Ranger is quite a bit better than the Siegebreaker, but because they're both assault rifles, base game especially, figured I'd mention it. If you have the Siegebreaker, it's a great pick. The number 7 position on this list is dedicated to SMGs. The best SMG in the game is the Thrasher. It is one of the highest DPS SMGs in the game. Without any special 6 perks or special situations, the Thrasher is the highest DPS SMG in the game. It has a great mix of a standard fire rate of 10.8. Reload, by the way, for every weapon in the game says 1 second. If you've been noticing that in this video, it's going to persist throughout the recording. It's a current bug. It's not a 1 second reload, but it is a pretty fair reload. low base mag size, which is easily fixed with a mag size perk, which is also not displaying in the game. It's got excellent perks. It's a really, really strong weapon. You pair this thing with Totally Rockin' Out especially, and it'll take excellent advantage of it. I'm going to keep this section of the video pretty quick because all of these SMGs, you point and click. It's fully auto, pretty straightforward. The Bobcat is very, very similar experience. It's just got a bigger mag size, slower reload, same awesome perks. It can even be like triple crit damage, which is really, really fun, as mentioned with the Pain Train. Any element, super, super good option. The Silent Spectre doesn't quite have that triple crit damage functionality, but it has that base 20% crit chance, just like the Wraith and the Whisper 45. These three weapons all have a base 20%. Most weapons have a base 10%, which means without Totally Rockin' Out, you can get that 48%, which is really, really high crit chance, which means you could be critting a lot. The reload is usually about 2 seconds, so with a mag size perk, you're just right back into the action. It's a super, super good weapon. The other weapon I want to mention here is the Rat-a-tat, because it's like the other SMGs in functionality, but it has so many perk options. It has all the perks I mentioned with the Pain Train earlier, triple crit damage as usual. You can run fire rate, double crit damage. It's a lot. There's a lot going on here. It's another one of those Swiss Army knives of weapons. The best perk to this video has a lot to talk about. It is a really, really good weapon as mentioned, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways to go with it. And perhaps, maybe the last that I'm mentioning, maybe the lowest damage, but maybe even my favorite in this category. It has a 1.5 second reload time, which is about as fast as other SMGs get with a reload perk. It has perfect perk options, crit rating, double crit damage, a base 34 mag size, which is higher than the usual 30. It has really good accuracy, really good range, really good bloom, so it sustains that accuracy over a long distance. Any element, excellent 6 perks. These are 6 perks from the spy weapon set, so if you stand in place, I mean, I don't like not moving, especially with an SMG, but you can take advantage of this to do 55% more damage or 85% more damage, or you can generate shield, which is less preferable, but there are options. That's my point. Damage to afflicted is great, but you could put crit rating, double crit damage, and then use another mag size perk if you wanted to. There are so many ways to go with the pepper sprayer. It is functionally a perfect SMG. The only place where it falls short is damage. Yeah, it's lowest on the stack in DPS. However, a team perk called Totally Rockin' Out exists, and if you use it with a crit damage lead, for example, this weapon is no longer flawed in any way. It is incredibly strong, extremely versatile. It's got everything going for it. It's one of my favorite SMGs in the entire game. So while it might not be king like the Thrasher all around, it might be worth your consideration. The number 6 category goes to like the lesser launchers in the game. Every single one of these launchers that I have set aside here are really good at shooting into a crowd of enemies and making that crowd of enemies not be there anymore. My favorite pick from this set is the Sodbuster. I've talked about the Art Deco weapons already, so to save some time, it does some extra damage versus elemental targets. Triple damage is ideal because weapons like this can be ran in a crit build, but you're basically gambling with every shot, and while every single enemy in the stack can crit individually, it's still not worth the gamble in my opinion. And with this kind of weapon, the lesser tier of launchers, you're not going to be using the Sodbuster versus Mist Monsters or Smashers, for example. You're going to be using it for the crowd of enemies in front of them. Then you switch to a different weapon to focus on that bigger target. So reload triple damage makes a ton of sense, and the exact same functionality goes for the Santa's Little Helper. This is one of my favorite picks. I was running a crit build just to have fun, but I want to tell you guys, triple damage and physical is an extremely breakpoint for damage. If you use this weapon 130 with a normal 130 power level player in a high level zone like the 164 players, that is enough damage to one-shot a nurse in a power level 250 zone. That is extremely satisfying and extremely important. You can just target the nurse, killing her and hopefully everything around it. Even physical on this weapon, you'll be doing just fine. Then as usual, you can switch off to a different weapon, focus on those other targets. Affliction is great, and I was doing the math on the crit build because I wanted to see how well a weapon like this could do versus a bigger target, and that's not what you want to do. Using this weapon over and over versus a big target like a Smasher is not going to be worth the ammo. There are much better ways to do it. See the SMG tier that I just talked about in this video. That will be a much better use case for Mist Monsters. However, I got to talk about these other launchers because the Metal Marauder is also very strong. It's locked to fire and physical, which isn't a big deal. It has that extra damage versus nature enemies, which is great. Also has that stunning and knock you back perk, which will do a ton of extra damage, which is really useful. It will lower your health. It's not everybody's favorite thing, but the damage absolutely makes up for it. Once again, I ran crit build here just for testing. You can do that. This is a great option, but triple damage is probably more smooth, and that's maybe a better way to go. And the last launcher that's similar is the Dam Buster. This weapon is really good at doing everything the other launchers can do, but it also knocks enemies around extremely well. It has a hidden value that is not listed on any weapon that is really high called knockback. Every single weapon has a knockback stat. It's not listed here, but it exists, and the Dam Buster does it best. It is really good at knocking Smashers around, endurance players players know exactly what I'm talking about. Lots of people will run this double reload just to knock enemies around, and that's perfectly viable, but it's also an extremely high damage weapon. In fact, the purple Dam Buster is still in the top 10 list for strongest launchers in the game. It's actually really, really interesting. So Dam Buster's really good. It's the final one I'm mentioning for a reason, but yeah. And then that was like the 4 main launchers. The other 2 I want to mention is the Jabberwocky and the Bowler. So the Jabberwocky is 1 base damage less than the Santa's Little Helper, and it shoots a cannonball that goes over a projectile arc, so it's not going to shoot straight where you're going, but it also explodes into 3 more cannonballs that do the same amount of damage. This is not a clickbait thumbnail, by the way. You can do 10 million damage if you crit with this weapon. It is insanely strong, very, very fun, extremely viable, and something you should absolutely try. The Jabberwocky is one of the strongest weapons in the game, which is why I'm mentioning it in this video. And I also wanted to mention the Bowler. It's significantly weaker, but it's a similar style weapon, and I felt like I couldn't mention the Jabberwocky without the Bowler, even if the Jabberwocky is the hugely stronger pick. So the number 5 position in this video pretty much couldn't have existed in my 2020 video because of a few rules. I did not include mythic weapons on my previous list. In my defense, mythic weapons had only been in the game for like a year. Most people didn't have them, and it felt unfair to include mythic weapons because I felt like they would dominate the list. A few things have changed. It's been several years. Most people who want mythic weapons and are high enough power level have them, and a lot of things have been discovered that make mythic weapons still amazing. Do not get me wrong, but they're not as dominant as they otherwise would have been. And finally, the blackout stuff had not been figured out. So let's start with the Storm King Scourge. I'm going to surprise nobody here and tell you guys that it's the best AR in the game, in my opinion. It's really, really strong. It has continuous firing, which means it pairs well with Crack Shot. It has an excellent unique 6 perk that does a ton of damage. This is one of those examples I mentioned where it's actually probably better than Affliction. Affliction might be the best normal 6 perk, but this is insanely strong. It has perfect perk options. You don't need reload. You don't need mag size because it's an overheating weapon, so it doesn't technically ever have to reload. That's why it pairs so well with Crack Shot. And Epic had to nerf these weapons by giving them energy and physical so they can't beat every element. It's insanely strong. And I'm going to be quick in saying that the Nocturno is a close second place, maybe even better. My perks on this are triple crit damage because I was just messing around with a fun build, but the Nocturno can also do millions of damage. It can have crit rating, double crit damage. It has a unique 6 perk, which is insane. Fun fact, a bug as of recording that has existed forever is that this 6 perk can crit. That's why I'm running triple crit damage on this, because if you have First Shot Rio, you can see her perk activates after a reload where you have a 100% chance to crit. And that affects the explosion in a very interesting way. You see, when you're damaging an enemy, you are stacking up an explosion that should do 65% of the total damage. However, if you crit, which can happen naturally, but it's guaranteed with First Shot Rio, that will actually multiply on top of all of the damage you've stacked up, meaning you could effectively kill a mini boss in one single magazine. This is an insane build that I've covered a couple of times on the channel. I'm going to link all those videos in the description down below, of course, but it is amazingly strong. However, that is something that I am pretty sure is a glitch, and it's also tied to an unobtainable $100 weapon, and that it requires an entire loadout to take advantage of. So for that reason, I can't count the Nocturno as the best weapon on its own, but when you set it up right, it is absolutely monstrous with the amount of damage it can do. I know, it's shocking that the Founder's top tier weapon that's inaccessible nowadays is amazing, but it is, and I'm really sorry to those of you who do not have access to this weapon. I don't want to include it because not everybody can get it, but it exists in the game, and I wanted to mention it. And I'm only bringing this up because it's not alone in this tier. Every other weapon in here is accessible to everybody, including the Blackout. The Blackout is an example of a weapon that's only as high up on the list as it is because of the loadout that you can build around it. All right, I got some bad news. So I am still going to show this loadout because I think it's amazing and I want it to be shown in this top 10 weapons video. But I have taken about 10 months to actually get to finishing this video, and some things have changed since then. Fallen Love Ranger Jonesy now gives you 2 energy per second in support instead of the previous 6 energy per second. So that means this build is no longer fueled with enough energy to keep up with the phase shifting you need to do to output the amount of damage that you once could. The build is still very fantastic if you want to give it a try, but the new top recommended loadout to take advantage of the black metal explosion is a Dirge Song. However, that is entirely based on just reloading the weapon with a different build. Both videos will be linked down below if you guys want to give them a try. So that reload causes an explosion is insane. It's influenced by hero ability damage, and it can crit, and it does a ridiculous amount of damage. You're probably seeing footage on screen of me dashing around, basically 2 or 3 shotting smashers. It is ludicrously strong, one of my favorite weapons in the entire game. I'm only putting this in the number 5 position because it is entirely reliant on the correct build. If you do not use this weapon correctly, that explosion will do an extremely balanced amount of damage, and it'll be fine, it'll be fun. But I really wanted to mention that this weapon is insane, probably a contender for the number 2 position on this list if you factored in loadouts. So really, really strong, does a ridiculous amount. The element is only fire and physical, but it barely matters because it does a ridiculous amount. In fact, I even made a video on this with the power level 19 2015 version of this weapon, it was still doing 2 million damage per boom. So super, super strong. And the same thing is true for the Dirge Song. I think the Blackout is a little better, especially with the Flash Out AC build. The Dirge Song has a different optimal build where you're just going all in on the crit damage of Sledge in the lead, Preemptive Strike 6 perk, Rio and support, and then the rest of them are pretty self-explanatory, just a normal build. This weapon can be insane as well. Very, very strong. Both of these Blackout boom builds are ridiculous and super worth using. Very, very recommend them. All right, now we're getting serious with this tier list. I guess we already did in the number 5 position, but the number 4 position is even crazier, in my opinion. Some of the melees in this game are incredible. So the Storm King's Ravager should surprise nobody that it's kind of awesome. There are multiple schematics 144 in my inventory because the perk options are insane. Triple attack speed, crit damage is incredible with Paleo Luna, Blast in the Past, Whiteout Fiona on support. The rest of the loadout is pretty irrelevant at that point. The normal Sunbeam, attack speed, double crit damage, crit rating, that is incredible with Totally Rocking Out. The 6th perk charges up a wave of damage that's so much, and it's ranged as well. It's incredible. I can't rave about this weapon enough. And then I've got a normal physical copy because, hey, fun fact, this is the highest DPS normal melee without any loadout whatsoever. Why that's important is because smokescreen mini bosses exist, and you might not be running a melee loadout in every single game. So if you ever see a smokescreen mini boss and you do not have a powerful ability like a minigun or lefty and righty, you can pull out a physical Storm King's Ravager with these perks and it will do great. It might feel weird running a melee with your soldier or outlander or constructor build, but this will do just fine. It'll take out the mini boss, and if everybody on the team runs something like that, you'll be doing great. So if the Storm King's Ravager can be used without a loadout, I think we all get the idea. It's very strong. The next one I want to mention is the Vacuum Tube Sword. I have to mention at the time of recording, this weapon has been bugged for a couple of months. Chain lightning weapons have just not been doing damage, but as I want this video to age through the years, I'm going to mention that normally this weapon works functionally as it should, and it's insanely strong. I have attack speed, crit damage here because I was playing around Toy Rocking Out, but if you do double attack speed with the normal Luna build that I've been mentioning forever, this thing is incredible. In a water zone, I believe it is the strongest melee in the game, even including the Ravager. That's my opinion, but that's what this whole video is, my opinion. The chain lightning on this weapon gives it so much crowd clearing. It is incredibly strong. It does great damage, swings fast. The chain lightning 6 perk is incredible. The loadouts just make it even better. Great weapon. I cannot recommend the Vacuum Tube Sword enough. Even in a nature zone, doing 67% of its normal damage instead of 100% is not that bad. You guys got to realize an energy Ravager is doing 75% to normal elemental targets. So nature versus nature or nature versus water, the Vacuum Tube Sword is an incredible choice, and I think it's the king of water zones. The other one I want to mention, obviously, is the Spectral Blade. I have multiple perks laid out here. I got Bright Core, I guess 2 different copies for some reason. Triple crit damage because it can be ran with Toy Rockin' Out. Super fun build. You might want a crit rating perk even if you're doing Toy Rockin' Out, but I wanted to mention the Spectral Blade is incredible. In a water zone, on paper, it out damages the Ravager. They are that close in DPS, and the Ravager stole its Lunging 6 perk from the Spectral Blade. It is locked to water, energy, and physical, so you don't exactly have every single element covered, but the amount of perk options you can run on this is super amazing. The damage is great. The attack speed is amazing, and I just love this weapon. And there's even an extra combo there where you can do double heavy attack efficiency, lunge around the map as a utility weapon, just great for movement. It's very, very strong. Spectral Blade, Ravager are neck and neck, and the Vacuum Tube Sword is just incredible in its field. Really, these are some of the top melees in the entire game, and because these are the last melees I'm going to be mentioning in this list, if you guys want to see an actual top 10 melees video, I'll link that in the description down below as well if you guys want to learn more. Okay, I had to say something. If you guys have no idea what's going on, this video's production has taken over 10 months. That is my bad. I am so sorry. I agree with most of this list. Rest assured, I have been double checking everything as I go, but the Spectral Blade in a recent tier list of mine has been dropped to high A tier. That is because the prevalence of Affliction has gone rampant on melees. Affliction is an insanely effective perk that adds a ridiculous amount of damage. It is extremely good, and any melee that doesn't have it is honestly at a severe disadvantage. There are 2 or 3 exceptions up here that get by because the Ravager is just as amazing as I said earlier. Everything is still true. It one-shots 250 power level smashers. I don't think I need to explain why that's amazing. The Stormblade crit hits cause an explosion is fantastic. With the right build, you can do over 1.5 million damage per second to a single target, and that explosion can affect everything nearby. It's amazing. The Vacuum Tube Sword with that chain lightning is also incredible. So those are 3 examples where Affliction doesn't quite have to be necessary. The Spectral Blade is really, really good for all the things I just set. Triple crit damage, triple attack speed, crit rating, double crit damage, attack speed. It has so much variety. The lunging attack, you can run this Bright Core or Sunbeam. There are reasons to have like 8 copies of this weapon. It is a really, really amazing weapon. So I'm leaving it in the higher melee section of this video, but I could not just drop this down from S tier and then just ignore that fact in this video. I really wanted to explain myself very thoroughly. This tier list video is a great watch if you guys want a thorough breakdown of why I placed all of these melees in their position. I got gameplay in that video too. It showcases all my major points. So link to that down below if you guys want to learn more. All right, the number 3 position, here it is, the bows. So the vacuum tube bow is the highest damage bow in the game. Maybe not single target, but the way that this weapon chains with Pharah is insane. Stoneheart Pharah exists. I have to consider her as an option that everybody's using. If you put her in the lead or support for that matter, this weapon will hit a target, chain to 6 targets, then those chain lightnings will activate her perk again. So you're shooting a target, then you're branching out into like 11 different directions, and then 6 of those directions will branch out another 5 times each. It's insane. You're hitting like 36 enemies per shot. It's a ridiculous amount of damage. It'll chain back and forth between targets if it works out. The vacuum tube bow is nature, but as mentioned with the vacuum tube sword, nature versus nature is just fine. Nature versus water is ideal. Nature versus physical is just fine. And I'm not even kidding. This is not great advice, but I can't deny the fact that it's kind of true. The vacuum tube bow versus fire enemies doing a quarter of its damage is actually still pretty good at what it does. It's kind of nutty to say that, but yeah, the vacuum tube bow is a monster, and I do believe it is the strongest bow in the game, if we're strictly talking about damage. These perks are ideal, by the way, and I understand that the vacuum tube bow is annoying. Sometimes this projectile will just go straight through targets. It has annoyed me plenty of times. It is kind of an annoying / skill-based weapon, but it is worth the damage in my opinion. Now, I am not going to make a top 10 list without championing the Xenon bow. This is the most popular weapon in Fortnite Save the World, I think is accurate to say. The Xenon bow shoots through everything. Walls, player builds, structures, hillsides. It goes straight through riot huskies. It goes straight through shielders. You don't even need to see your target. It goes through everything. It's like the 9th hardest hitting bow in the game, which is not good. It's locked to energy, which is a further nerf. But considering it can pierce an infinite amount of targets, which in the real world in a dense encampment might be like anywhere from 1 enemy to 30 enemies in one shot, you can also put Stoneheart Pharah in the lead or support, which I think is better for the Xenon bow because Rabbit Raider Jonesy exists. If you're running Totally Rockin' Out, which you probably should be, by the way, best bow loadouts video, link in the description down below if you guys want to hear more about what I'm talking about here, but Rabbit Raider in the lead, Totally Rockin' Out, Pharah in support, this thing will hit very hard with all of those buffs, and it'll pierce all of the targets, and it is really, really good. I genuinely believe the vacuum tube bow is stronger, but do not let that take away from the fact that the Xenon bow is amazing. It is the most popular weapon for a reason. And that projectile doesn't just work against enemies, it can do objectives for you. You can just shoot off into the map, break a bunch of TVs or gnomes or whatever, and ta-da, your quest is done. I don't think it should work like that, but Epic has left it alone for like 5 years, so I'm not going to say anything. That's been working for a long time, and it is just incredible. It has Affliction, as mentioned, that's amazing. I believe most Xenon bows come with Snare. You guys definitely want to core perk Affliction. That extra damage is great, because if you shoot an enemy and leave them at like 10% health, Affliction will do the rest of the damage, and that'll be great. And I also want to make him mention here that the Xenon bow can be Bright Core or Sunbeam and be super effective. I made a whole video on that. It's super popular on my channel. You might want to check it out, because Bright Core Xenon bow actually kills in about the same amount of shots as Sunbeam. So you can save a lot of resources. It'll have more durability. It will shoot faster in between shots, which is really, really good. And mine's Sunbeam, but you might get away with Bright Core. Very, very good. Now, the lesser of the 3 is the Cloudburst. This weapon is crazy strong, and it's the first steampunk weapon I'm mentioning because it has that Cloud of Steam 6 perk, which when you kill an enemy, it activates a Cloud of Steam, and that Cloud of Steam does a ridiculous amount of damage. If you funnel the enemies properly, it does require some setup because enemies won't usually just walk into the cloud. If you funnel the enemies properly and shoot on the first enemy in that row, everything will walk into it and everything will die. And an extra note for that Steam Cloud is that it activates Pharah's perk as well. It's not nearly as sexy as the Chain Lightning, but it definitely works. So it's kind of like a conditional group damage where the Xenon Bow just shoots through everything and the Vacuum Tube Bow, Chain Lightning, will seek those enemies out. The Cloud of Steam, it requires a little bit more finesse, but it does a ton of damage, and it can be any element. It can be any element, you guys. There is good reason to run 3 different copies of these in your build. You can have all of the bows ready for whatever mission you're in. Super, super strong single target. The Steam Cloud does a great job at crowd clearing. It's a really, really strong weapon. In the number 2 position, we have some of the hardest hitting weapons in Fortnite Save the World, shotguns. Yes, I am putting some of these shotguns above the bows because they are incredible at what they do. The Huskbuster is a base game shotgun that is scavenger, which is extremely cheap to craft, has excellent perks, affliction, everything I've been mentioning throughout the video, and it hits like a truck. Boom, 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 boom. It'll sit down a power level 250 smasher and about 5 crits. It is incredibly strong. Activating Totally Rocking Out is easy to do, and because it's base game, it's accessible to everybody. Very, very good weapon. What's even technically stronger than it damage per second wise is a ground pounder. This is locked to the military llamas. It is not available to everybody without flux or getting lucky, but if you pair this weapon with, again, Totally Rocking Out and Chaos Agent to reload your weapon as soon as you can, this thing out damages the Huskbuster by about 20%, but you'll be shooting more to achieve the same thing. Regardless, the ground pounder is one of my favorite weapons in the entire game. The fire rate is incredibly high. That means with affliction, you can just go boom, 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 knock out an entire crowd of enemies, and because you're spraying pellets, not just a single slug, you can hit multiple targets with the same shot if you line it up correctly. The ground pounder is incredible. It's not clickbait in my video, link down below, where I say you can hit 3 million DPS with this weapon. I also have another video with the Huskbuster. Everything will be linked down below if you guys want to check out the description. I'll elaborate more on everything down there. Huskbuster and ground pounder are 2 of the strongest weapons in the game, and that is well known by everybody. But what a lot of people don't know is that the pop shot is actually the highest DPS shotgun in the game, mathematically speaking. What? Where did that come from? You've been talking about the ground pounder Huskbuster for years. What? Well, okay. The pop shot has some really interesting perks. You'll note that we're using mag size and reload, and that's very intentional. Shotguns reload based on how many shells they need to reload over a period of time. It is not calculated on a per shell basis. What that means is if you use a reload speed perk, you'll reload the shells quicker, but if you increase your mag size and it won't change how long it takes to reload, you'll still reload 75% quicker. So it's functionally identical to use mag size, but then you have more in the chamber. Crit rate and crit damage is obviously ideal. This weapon can be any element. Affliction's great. It is a really, really fast firing, really fast reloading weapon, which is so fast reloading, by the way, that you don't need Chaos Agent like the other 2 shotguns. You can actually put a damage perk in support to make it even stronger. Very, very good weapon. I don't think it's the best shotgun in the game. That's why I'm mentioning it third. Even though the damage supports it, it's got less range than the other ones. You're reloading more, albeit faster, and it's just a little bit less accurate, so it's harder to be as effective, but it is very, very strong, and it uses a lot more ammo to get to the same goal, so it's a little less cost effective. Although on the note of accessibility, the pop shot is probably the second easiest to get over the ground pounder because it's available in the winter llamas, so for 20% of the year, you can just pick up the pop shot from your llamas, so everybody has a chance to get this weapon within a year's time. Now, as for the other 2 shotguns, I got a couple of things to mention here. The first one I want to talk about is a double boiler. It is not like the other ones. It's not a semi-auto, but it hits like a truck. And it's another Steam Cloud weapon where it activates the Steam Cloud 6 perk, doing all the things that the Cloudburst one did. I don't need to elaborate on that. It basically gives a hard-hitting shotgun a area of effect perk. It's really amazing. It's a really good combination. The perks are great. And the double boiler used to be the hardest-hitting non-launcher in the game, but then the third rail sniper came along and screwed all that up. That thing's not on this list, by the way, because it has a 3-second charge-up time. It's functionally useless for crowds, and its damage is not enough to make up for that. The double boiler, on the other hand, can go boom, boom, reload, boom, boom, reload, and you're doing a ridiculous amount of damage at the same time. This is an extremely fun weapon. My video will be linked down below if you guys want to see more. Very, very good. An honorable mention of this tier is the Browbeater, because it's very similar single target damage. You just need 2 of them to really counteract that extremely slow fire rate. But as you're seeing on screen, I did once use it to solo a mini boss, and I've actually used this in Frostnite a couple of times. So I'll link 1 or 2 of those Frostnite runs down below. This weapon is incredibly strong. Any weapon that can hold itself against, power level 500 enemies is pretty darn good. And the Browbeater is one of those weapons. Again, it's an honorable mention because you need 2 of them, but very, very strong weapon. And now, finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, the best weapons in Fortnite Save the World. Obviously, the Plasmatic Discharger is in the number 1 position. I think that surprised absolutely nobody. This weapon does a ridiculous amount of damage to normal targets, normal mist monsters, whatever. It can just shoot a ball of energy that makes sure nothing is left behind, but it's also bugged to do extra damage versus smashers and the Storm King end phase. So if you shoot this thing against a smasher or a smasher mini-boss model, it annihilates them. I'm using Frostnite footage here. These are power level 500 enemies, and it is chewing through them like they weren't even there. It's incredibly strong. We did an entire run running Discharger only. That's the footage you're seeing, by the way. I'll link down below, of course. It is crazy strong. We didn't even need traps. It is incredibly strong. And then against the Storm King, I popped Totally Rockin' Out one time in my Jack's Revenge video, and that end phase was 3 seconds long. There's like nothing to show there because it's that freaking strong. And it is bugged to do that amount of damage. It is specifically targeting smashers and the end phase 7.5 times more than other targets. So I don't even know why it's doing that, but the 6 perks are incredible as well. What you've got here is a perk that consistently slows and then freezes enemies, which is really, really useful. That's my preferred one. And then it's got a shield perk, which is whatever, and a perk that is in theory good. You know, when they're below 50% health, they just die immediately. That has not functioned ever. So I don't actually know how good that is because the perk just doesn't work, but in theory, it's kind of a good option. I prefer slowing the target down because that's obviously really useful versus Mist monsters. That does not function against mini bosses. And I want to talk about something that a lot of people don't know, and that's damage to Mist monster bosses. Critical damage is perfectly fine. This will work. You can turn your brain off and just use that. But technically, damage to slowed and snared and damage to slowed and snared pairs really well with the 6 perk and is technically more damage versus normal targets and even Mist monsters. However, because you can't slow mini bosses, these become dead perks if you're using damage to slowed and snared. So I think damage to Mist monster bosses is good because you don't need you do not need extra damage versus normal targets with a weapon of this caliber. That is just not necessary. So the extra damage to the enemies that actually need it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, Discharger is insane. The other one I want to mention is the Storm King's Wrath. This should surprise nobody. It's one of the best weapons for killing crystals quickly in the Storm King fight. The Storm King's Wrath is supposed to be the strongest single target launcher in the game, and for all intents and purposes, that's kind of true. It does really, really good damage versus Mist monsters, mini bosses. You see all the different perk options I got running here. Fire rate is really good for like MSK for crystals. Damage to Mist monsters and bosses is a little bit more ammo efficient for using it against, you know, individual targets like Mist monsters and bosses. But then comes along the pot shot, which is just bugged. It's been bugged forever. Everybody knows this. It does more damage than it should. Here's a little formula from AS407 that kind of shows what's going on a little bit, but randomly, we don't specifically know how to activate it, but it just randomly does 97% extra damage sometimes, and it's usually doing more damage than it should because it's kind of triggering 2 explosions that each individually have their own chance to crit. I could do an entire video on this once it's fully figured out, but we still don't fully know what's going on. The point is, the pot shot does a ridiculous amount of damage. I made a whole video on the best perks for this. You should watch that link down below because it shows a ridiculous amount of gameplay. I'm really happy with how the recording for that gameplay went because I'm just murdering smashers for the entire video, and you're seeing some of that right now. It is sitting down, power level 250 smashers with no effort. This is not even a launcher build. You don't need any loadout for this weapon. It just deletes smashers and Mist monsters and anything you pointed at. It soloed the mini boss without hardly any help at all. This was a tank smasher. It would have been better to use the Discharger, but just to show how strong the pot shot is, it did not struggle at all. That is why I have 4 different copies of this weapon, all with the same optimal perks, because whatever element the mini boss is, I'm ready. Obviously, the physical one will do the most damage, but not every mini boss is physical. So I just pull out whatever element makes sense. If it's trap vulnerable or if it's smokescreen mini boss, I do not use the pot shot. I feel like enough people need to hear this nowadays. If it's smokescreen, use a melee or an ability. If it's trap vulnerable, use traps. Please, people. I hear way too many stories of public lobbies where people use the pot shot versus anything. That's not how that works. I will say, though, in complete contradiction, the Discharger, we use this in the Frostnite runs, does way too well versus smokescreen mini bosses. It should not be doing as well as it does, and yet this weapon is overpowered. But that's specifically for the Discharger versus smashers. You should still not be using that against smokescreens in regular games. That was just Frostnite because they are way too strong to get close to. But the pot shot, incredible weapon, surprising nobody to say it, is the final mention of the best weapons in Fortnite Save the World. The raw recording of this is over 40 minutes long. I don't know what the editor's gonna do to this. I think we can cut out a lot of mistakes, but I'm sorry if this ran a little long. There's just so much more to talk about. I mean, this game has not been updated a ton in the last 3 years, but as mentioned with the blackout weapons and the pot shot, we've discovered a lot more. The Discharger exists now. Things are just a little bit more nuanced, a little more understood, and yeah, I just had a lot of things I wanted to say, and I wanted to inform you guys as best as possible. So there's my list. Comment down below what you guys thought. I did put a lot of work into this. I don't show a lot of math in my videos as to not bore you guys, but it is well backed by math, science, specific in-game testing. I do make these lists with a lot of great care, and I think this one is solid. So if you guys like the video, subscribe, like the video. I really do appreciate it. You know, check out more recommended videos. Lots of them are linked down below. I'll see you guys in the next one, I hope. And yeah, thanks again for watching. And then